Hello, my name is Professor Mark Baines, and welcome again to week 8 now of Concordia University's Exercise Physiology for Sport. And today we're going to be talking about preventing chronic disease and some other factors affecting performance. So beginning with some factors affecting performance, some challenging concepts to make sure we have clear. Testing, any sort of testing for strength, for endurance, for agility, for power, for speed, for glycolytic or anaerobic threshold, lactate threshold type levels, we're looking at, generally speaking, one to assess about every 4 to 12 weeks. If you recall, a few weeks before, we talked about how your endocrine system and your nervous system adapts significantly, or should be adapting significantly, and changing and altering and improving every 4 to 6 weeks or so, maybe as much as 4 to 8 weeks, but generally speaking, every 4 to 6 weeks, which is why a 4-week time frame is not a bad idea for doing assessments. And when you're particularly concerned about, which I think you should be, the programming you're actually giving to your athletes and to your clients and whoever you're working with, you want to make sure you assess often enough that you can be sure what you're really assessing is their response to the programming you're giving them. One of the reasons we have 3 exams on our exercise physiology course at Concordia University is we don't want to just have one test of the entire. It's too much information. We want to have a better idea as we're going how people are doing with the information, the material, not just test to have a test, not just because it's time to have a test. Same goes with physical performance. We're actually assessing to see if our programming is getting the job done. And when we assess and the results are not what we want them to be, we have to determine whether or not our goals were too high or our programming is inefficient or inappropriate or ineffective. And then we have to figure that out. Where the mistakes are or where the challenges are. So it should be as little as or as often as every 4 weeks and not more than 12. And honestly, 12 weeks is an awful long time. I would only do that if you've had an athlete you've been working with for such a long period of time that you're less concerned about seeing these minute little changes, want to see broader changes, so you don't test them as often. When you've had an athlete you've seen for years now, then we're talking about maybe broadening the time frame between you assessing them. But the earlier or the newer this athlete is for you, the shorter your season, the less time you have with someone, the more often you need to assess. Okay, so that's how you know how often you should be doing it, based upon the overall goal, based upon how long they've been working with you as a whole. So how well do you know this athlete in general? Because you have a better idea for feel for things and working with you longer. So consequently, you can assess less often in some cases, right? And certain top-level elite athletes during their off-season, they don't need to be assessed every few weeks necessarily. But for your high school level athletes and collegiate level athletes, highly recommend you test them a whole lot more often, not less often, to be able to get a better idea of how your programming is doing. Okay, and of course you determine what tests you're going to do based upon the needs of your athletes. What's the most predominant need? Is it speed? Is it agility? Is it power? Is it strength? Is it hypertrophy? Whatever it is, that should be your predominant testing you're focusing on first, and everything else takes a back seat or is secondary. Now there are various forms of strength. Honestly, producing force in general is strength, right? When you're talking about mobility, your movement skill, your coordination, your movement control, motor control, all those things that relate to moving well in general. We're talking about low-level force production, 20% or less, generally speaking. We'll mention more about that in a moment here as well. But it's very low-level force. We're talking about low-level speeds to begin with, and worried about being able to do it for longer periods before you start worrying about adding more force or making it shorter duration of time period. Power is maximal force output in as little time as possible. You can be really strong, maximal strength, but not necessarily powerful, because you haven't been able to produce that force significantly over short periods of time. So don't confuse the two. One can help the other, but you can have one and not the other. That's key. Got to understand that. What's your primary goal? The power or the speed? Or, I'm sorry, it's the power or the strength. And speed is an aspect of power, but not exactly the same. You might be able to throw a quick punch or a quick kick, or kick quickly, or move your arms real fast, but you might not necessarily be fast running, right? Or quick off the line. And so those are aspects. Quickness is an aspect of power specifically that's separate from speed, right? That's starting strength, if you will, starting power, if you will, really not starting strength. Honestly, okay? Starting strength would be how much force you produce at the beginning of your movement under heavy loads, okay? Speed is the ability, of course, to produce force very, very quickly as well, but it specifically relates to usually a little bit longer durations of time than just power is very, very quick. And speed is an aspect of that, but we intend to lengthen those periods out a little more. Are you trying to be fast over 10 yards, 5 yards, 20 yards? If we're talking about water or land or ice or whatever we're talking about, or maybe much longer than that. Right? Some people tend to refer to things like speed endurance or endurance speed, and it kind of confuses people. Well, speed endurance would be more focused towards speed, but speed over a little bit longer period. Okay, endurance speed would be you're working on endurance, but you're trying to be fast over endurance work. Okay, if you ever hear those terms, that's the way they should be referring to them. Agility is the ability to change direction quickly with control, forward to backward, side to side, up to down, any of the above, right? Go one way and come back to the way as fast as possible. Go one way and completely change your direction and go quickly in another direction. A lot of sports require this, and it should be very short durations of work. It's related to power, absolutely, but it's even more stressful than power because you're not just going in one direction like you do with typical power or speed or strength. Here we're talking about going one way, stopping, starting, and going the other way again, all happening very, very quickly. Agility is one of those things that can take away the most from an athlete's capabilities by overworking them, by thinking you're doing better by going drill after drill, hard after hardcore effort, one after the other. Would highly recommend not doing that. How do we know? As we said a million times now, and to keep reiterating it, you get that stopwatch out. You're watching their form. You're asking their RPE, rate of perceived exertion. You're taking their heart rate. Numerous factors to know. Ideally, you want to see RPE going down, the heart rate going down, effort even not being that necessarily high, but they're getting faster and stronger, meaning they're more efficient with what they do. Over time, of course, right? But if we see any lacking for what we normally see, because we're tracking all this data, we'll know if they're going down, going the wrong direction. Maximal strength, kind of mentioned a moment ago, we're talking about the maximal force production you can actually produce to get super strong. If the goal is to get super strong, you're not looking at high speeds, you're looking at slow speeds. You can produce more force slower than you can fast. It's really important to understand that. I'm not talking about the impact. If you throw a punch, well, if you catch the impact at the right point because of the speed of that motion at a given moment, there'll be a certain point where you can produce a significant amount of force versus going slow. But I'll tell you what, find the exact point, where you get the most power of your punch. And if you gave exact maximal exertion with your entire body into that, you produce a lot more force that way. Okay, granted, we're not talking about just local muscular strength per se there, but if the goal is to maximize strength, want to develop that slowly and exerting more and more force. Think like pushing like a car. Okay, we're talking about maximizing strength. People they pull sleds or push sleds, that same kind of thing. Of course, we wouldn't want to be working on maximal strength if we haven't first worked on endurance strength. Okay, the lowest levels of strength after mobility, really, mobility first. And then endurance type strength, where you can produce force, not necessarily high levels of force, but moderate levels of force. We're talking about no more than 60-65% maximal force output, generally speaking. Get good at that. Be able to produce repeated efforts of that. Then we start worrying about getting into hypertrophy and maximal strength and whatnot. Hypertrophy, which we didn't put on here, is really, we're talking about building mass. So it's not specifically focused on how much force you produce, so much as building size. And building size can be developed working on endurance type strength, because you're working on the development of size of the type 1 muscle fibers and their capabilities. When we say hypertrophy, some people think it has to always be really intense. Nope. Low intensity is going to hypertrophy your type 1 fibers. Low and slightly toward low end to moderate, going to be type 1 fibers. Then the type 2A fibers, and of course type 2X. It's going to be dependent upon the level of force production we're talking about involving. Okay. If we're trying to maximize hypertrophy, we're talking about type 2A fibers in particular. We're talking about somewhere in that 70% to 80%, give or take, force production range for maximizing hypertrophy. Probably 75% maximal force production. So muscle fiber types, we've mentioned this before, but your type 1 muscle fibers, they become engaged first when an exercise is beginning, because if it's low levels of effort that are required for the muscles that are involved in this particular movement or joint action or joint actions. Okay, type 1 fibers become involved first, the red, slow twitch, endurance-focused type fibers with the large mitochondria, the capable high red blood cell count, high hemoglobin levels, and they can produce force for longer periods of time, but very low levels of force production. Type 2A fibers become more and more involved as you engage somewhere in that. As you start moving up in general, of course, there's someone involved at the very beginning no matter what, but there's more type 1 fibers involved. Type 2A fibers become more dominant, more the dominant fiber, not the only fibers, the more dominant fibers, somewhere in that 60%-ish, 70%-ish force production range, somewhere in there, okay? And so, of course, you're building in the 85-ish, 90% range and above, you're going to see type 2X fibers begin to take over and be the predominant muscle fiber. Now, again, not the only ones, but the predominant ones, okay? As far as applying the science versus being exact, I'm going to always hammer you in terms of you being clear when you say high intensity, low intensity, moderate intensity, short rest, long rest, We're going to go build endurance. We're going to build strength. What do you mean exactly? And I know you can't be perfectly exact. My athlete's going to exert exactly 65% max force production with a level 5 to 6 RPE. That's the goal. Understand we're talking about goals, expectations, based on what we know with the science, knowing there will be some variance. Here's the kicker, though. Even though there will be some variance, if it varies far from this, well, if it's varying for the positive, then we have a freak athlete, and we're blessed to have this person, and they're blessed to have such ability. Then that's a whole different ball game. There are going to be those people that are the outliers in a positive way that actually are outside the norms we're talking about, and they're going to get more benefit in less time. They're going to be more capable than almost everybody else around them. They can seemingly do more. Well, those are the athletes that honestly we should be spending the most time with. When I say the most time with, I mean everybody else starts going home, they stick around, because they can handle more. Not they get more of your attention in large groups. That happens too, unfortunately. But then they stick around. They can handle it. And you say to your other athletes going, and this, I'm just suggesting this is a possibility, and I have done this. I've never had a problem with athletes being bothered like, why are you keeping so-and-so around? I want to stick around. Well, occasionally if they want to stick around, they can, but it's real simple. I'm sending you home because you can only do 6 intervals, whereas this particular athlete can do 8 at the same speed. You're dropping off. It's time for you to go home. Okay, I'm going to have this athlete stick around because they can do more, so we're going to keep them going. We're going to enhance and build upon what they can already do because they're capable. You're not. Why would I drive you down 2 more intervals while you're losing speed? If the goal is to run a 28-second 200-meter dash, whether we're talking or a 40-yard dash in a 4.8 or 4.9, and here you are pulling him to 5.2, 5.3, we're dropping more than 5%. And if you're dropping more than 5% in your performance over what your capabilities are, we got to ask ourselves, is this the goal we're trying to accomplish here or not? You better have that timer out. You better be watching their form, their control, asking their rate of perceived exertion, checking their heart rate after every single set. If you do these things, it becomes a piece of cake over time with your athletes, knowing when they're ready to do more or not. They'll know. They'll tell you, you know, I feel like I want to do more, but I just feel like it's not really in me today. And you'll go, that's exactly what I'm getting by what I'm watching right now. I'm seeing you dropping in time a little bit. I see you look like you're doing okay motor control-wise. I'm not seeing you fall off there. Something's just not clicking there today. It's just not there. Okay, we need to take it back off a little bit today, and we're going to come back again tomorrow. It's amazing when you start developing that rapport between you and your athletes, and they start trusting you on that. How does that happen? By you showing them, going, I said you couldn't beat your time next time, and you didn't. You worked harder. I saw you working harder. Facial expression changed. You were working harder. You were trying to do more, and you ran slower. Or you worked harder. You tried to put more effort into that squat, or a bench press, or a pull-up, and you started using your body by throwing your body into it. You didn't get better. Sure, you got 6 pull-ups versus 5 last time, but this time you had horrible form because you weren't using the same muscles that were involved in a typical pull-up. Consequently, you got worse, not better. Not what we want. That's what we're talking about. We talk about exact. Okay. And of course, when it comes to your posts or discussion board posts with your each week, I highly recommend, if you're not the first person to post always has putting themselves out there because they're the ones that are putting the first post out, no one to look at, no background. So, hey, kudos to you, those of you that are always putting the first posts out. You're not a bad person if you're not the first poster, but it's always difficult if you're the first one. What should be happening for everybody else who posts after that, you should be looking at the people who posted before you, reading their posts, asking them questions, checking in with them. And then when it comes to you writing your own post, it should be a better post, at least theoretically, than the ones that came before you. I don't mean you have to write something spectacular and try to outdo everybody else, but you should be benefiting from the fact there's other people who've posted before you. That's the whole idea. Like we come to a class, the expectation is over the course of each week, you should be getting better because you're building upon what you know. Build upon those people who come before you to present a little bit and build upon what they've said, ask them questions, and it should spark ideas for you when you make your own posts. Now, important concepts for our 8th week here of our course. We're talking about chronic disease-related issues or problems, chronic challenges in general. Chronic disease risk, biological chronic disease risk means something in your background, something you can't control. Your age, who you're related to, okay? And anything that's related to some aspect of something genetic to you that actually you cannot specifically control. It is what it is. We understand to some extent over time, after somewhere in the late teens to probably somewhere mid to upper 30s at the very, very most, you're going to lose a step. You're going to not be quite the same athlete you were. I've never seen anybody who's actually a top world-class best athlete who was necessarily better later years unless they had just gotten into it in their later years and went from there. You just don't see it. Okay, you don't have to lose a lot. And of course, what a lot of athletes do is they move into sports that are more and more endurance oriented as their age gets up there, because of course the endurance is the last thing to go. So you can actually perform at higher level effort for a longer period of time. If you're going for force production requirements that are 60-65% of your max, well, your 100% max, you're not going to have the same thing at 45 versus 18. That's just unequivocal. You're not going to have that if you were truly working at your highest levels of effort through your early teen years going into your 18th birthday, so to speak, right? That said, however, your endurance could actually possibly be improved because you've been working out for so long, you've gotten better at understanding of how to train that and improve that skill in your later years, and so consequently you could be relatively similar or possibly even better for really long endurance efforts because of that. But still, biological factors play a role. Environmental factors. The weather, environmental factors relating to the people you're with and around that are also going to affect your behavior, of course, too. There's a interrelationship between all these factors. The environment itself, whether it's hot or cold, whether it's an appealing environment outside, inside, whether it's situation, the turf, the ground, or whatever you're working on, you have to really be thinking about all those things for how you're going to maximize performance. Don't try to look for ways to make it harder. Look for ways to maximize performance. If I make it harder, it makes you slower. Are you sure that was the goal? Right? If I give you more weight and you can't do as much, are you sure that was the goal? Are you sure you want to lift more weight with less effort, or with a little bit less weight but go for longer? Are you sure? Be clear about what the goal is before you do it, right? You can affect the environment. You can affect their behavior to a certain extent. You can't affect the biological. Okay, but you can make that chronological or biological, those factors become less important by how you adapt the environment for your athletes and how you, of course, affect their behaviors with how you motivate, what you say to them between sets, what you say to them beginning of your training, at the end of each day, how you help them set goals. Sure, of course, talking about heart rate and RPE between every set, because it gets them focused and self-focused, more biofeedback for themselves about what's going on. You can absolutely affect things positively to avoid the probabilities of chronic disease risk with all these factors of influence you have available to you. No one's saying it's easy, but you certainly have a lot of control here. And if you have athletes that are becoming chronically stressed and they've been with you for a long time, you can ask yourself, is that something that really you could have helped control a little bit? And if you could, then, well, let's not make that same mistake next time. Let's work with this athlete to help them get better off so this is not a chronic problem for them ongoing. It doesn't cause a major health risk down the road, okay? It's only a chronic problem if, generally speaking medically, if the person's had this particular issue where they're chronically fatigued, they have chronic issues with pain, chronic issues with hormonal problems or hormonal response for 6 months or more. Okay, if you've had it for a couple months now, it's really annoying, it's bothersome, it's potential, the risk is increasing for sure. You've had it for a while now, but it's not typically referred to as chronic from a medical perspective for potential high health risk and somebody to be looking as a possible disease or syndrome once it's at least 6 months in. Okay. Now, inflammation itself is a very normal response. You're going to have inflammation from stress in general. If you have stress, you're going to have inflammation. Okay, if you eat something, it's a poor choice, you've got more inflammation. If you eat too much food, there's more inflammation. If you engage in high stress more than you're used to, there's going to be more inflammation in the cells, in those muscles that were doing work, right? Now, that in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. We talk a lot about homeostasis. If you push beyond, within a few percentage points, beyond what you've normally been doing, your body's going to have chronic inflammation from the standpoint of it's going to be pushed beyond its normal time frame. We want to call it prolonged inflammation. It's probably a better way of putting it. Inflammation is going to be occurring for a longer period. You're stiff. You're sore. That's what that is. It's prolonged inflammation. Okay, that's not the only thing it is, but that's part of what's going on. Okay, you got your immune system response that's on high alert. Your white blood cells are on high alert trying to deal with stress, but figure there's something wrong here that are trying to actually deal with the stress, and it's creating this inflammatory response as your body tries to deal and cope with the stress to return the body back towards homeostasis, to deliver oxygen and nutrients to the tissues, to remove that venous pooling, to remove the excess hydrogen ions not remove lactic acid. Don't say that. That's not what it's looking to do, okay? Removing lactate, sure, but really your problem of why you're getting that stiffness and of course the inability to produce force with you when you engage in higher level effort and you get that burning sensation, that's excess hydrogen ions that build up of the breaking apart of ATP and the excess hydrogen ions that are floating around there, and they're actually blocking, inhibiting troponin binding sites on the muscle fibers, so it's making it harder and harder to replenish ATP and actually get muscular contraction at the same time you're trying to remove the metabolic waste. That's what's going on, okay? And of course, the more that process goes on for longer periods, the more inflammation we have, the more chronic disease risk increases. So what's our goal? Well, like we said millions of times before, you get the proper stress, not easy, no question about it, for the proper period of time, the proper rest between stressors, including between sets, as well as including between days. That's going to come up more here in a second, okay? Central fatigue versus peripheral fatigue. When you are just worn out, just flat out worn down, that's a time not to work out. Your whole body is not feeling good. You do something super light, just keep yourself mobile and not stiff. Something that's definitely in that 30-40% VO2 max level, give or take a little bit of range there for aerobic type level work. Okay, something you could do for lengthy periods that wouldn't stress you out or get your heart rate up significantly above somewhere in that 55-60% max heart rate at the most, give or take. Okay, and your RP is like 4 or 5, somewhere in there on a scale 1 to 10. Your force output's probably like 20-30-40% max force output, very low, right? Nothing feels hard. It shouldn't feel hard when you're worn down. Now, what's happened is sometimes people feel worn down. They have a good warm-up that was designed well, and they slowly build into it. They start feeling good. All right, that can happen. That's why a lot of people gauge their ability to train in a given day with a good warm-up and determine, like, how do I feel at the end of that warm-up? Do I feel like I've got it? Or no, it's still not there. Then, you know, your warm-up was your workout today, was your training session today, and call it good with that. Okay, peripheral fatigue. You're fatigued. Your certain muscles are fatigued, but the rest of you is not. You have energy as a whole, but you can only produce so much force with your arms or your shoulders or your legs, something like that. More peripheral fatigue. Then we have to be very light activity, have light activity with those particular areas, and we can work on other things. But be careful, we don't want to take that peripheral fatigue and turn it into central fatigue. Okay, that's a concern for sure. But you've had those days, we've all had those days where you feel like you got energy, but your muscles just aren't doing their job. Well, you don't feel like you're worn out. You don't have central fatigue, but you do have peripheral fatigue. Okay, that does happen. Frustrating, but much easier to deal with, and much more likely to take less time in recovery than central fatigue. Okay, and of course, central fatigue can be dealt with as well with eating properly, getting more. Guess which nutrient you should know? Carbohydrate. Complex carbohydrate, low glycemic index carbohydrates predominantly. Oh, don't get me wrong, everything else too, as we've always said, but certainly the carbohydrates, right? And of course, more sleep than normal. Get to bed earlier. Getting to bed earlier has been shown to have, you got bed 1 hour earlier than normal, is the equivalency of getting 2 hours extra sleep. Now, is that an exact number? No. But is it a really important number to know? Yeah. If you normally sleep 10 to 6, you might want to think about going to bed at 9, not trying to sleep 11 to 7. Go to bed at 9, wake up at 6. Be amazed the difference you get in rest by doing that. Okay. Rest periods between sessions. Well, we've been talking about this. Let's make it more clear. Between maximal efforts, maximal speed, maximal power, maximal agility, maximal strength at 90-95%, typically 95%, but 90-95% to 100% maximal force output efforts that are like 1 to 10 seconds-ish, maybe a little bit more in terms of time. Rest periods of 3 to 5 minutes between sets. You can rest less than that, but good luck to you producing the same amount of force next set, which I'm assuming was your goal, right? But between days of doing this kind of stuff again, 3 to 4 days. Some people say like 1 speed day a week or 1 power day or strength day a week. The problem is going to be with that, if you have too much time between in recovering, you will lose some of the adaptations you are gaining. You don't want to go too long between sessions of similar level of intensity to gain the benefit of that intensity. It's really important. You don't want to go more than 3 to 4 days. If you did, then I don't understand what you're trying to accomplish here. I've heard many people say that. For an endurance athlete saying, once every couple weeks do a speed workout. Okay. For someone who's not a speed athlete, but someone who's more to an endurance, or I'm sorry, more of a speed to power type athlete, get a little light cardio in once every week or two. Like, what? What are you trying to accomplish here? Doesn't make any sense. Be clear about what we're trying to accomplish and understand the time between to gain the benefit from that stress. Between doesn't mean you can't do a power effort followed by the next day an endurance effort. Sure, for sure. But it's got to be low level intensity. We'll get to endurance if it's endurance. And when you do the endurance again, that's what we're talking about. Or if it's a glycolytic, which is like high intensity interval type stuff, hypertrophy type work, and your high challenging intervals. Short work periods, which are as little as 20 seconds, about 120 seconds. But generally speaking, we talk a lot about somewhere in that 20-30 seconds for really trying to maximize the high level glycolytic response. We do 20-30 seconds work with about 90 seconds rest. Okay, you can go longer in work period if you want. Go to 30-60 seconds or 30-90 seconds or even 30-120 seconds, but the rest period is going to have to be shorter. Not have to be shorter. You should expect the rest period to be shorter because your intensity can only be so high. That's counter to what a lot of people think, well, work period's longer, so rest period should be longer. No, if the work period's longer, force production capacity is lower, so consequently you shouldn't need as much rest to do it. So if you're working longer, but you're still needing longer rest, you're probably not conditioned well enough for that type of a stress. You're trying to work for too long of a period for something you're not ready for, and rest period is not enough. So now you're doing these anaerobic power type rests with glycolytic work. Now that doesn't make any sense. Be clear about that. But 2 to 3 days between glycolytic interval type work. And of course between endurance days, every 1 to 2 days. And if you're talking about elite type people, some people do some of these workouts. They'll do a power workout in the morning, endurance workout in the evening. Yeah, you can do that. What about doing power and endurance in the same day? Be very careful about putting more than one high-level effort into the same practice or session. Most cases, actually pretty much every case, you need to be clear about your primary goal for that day when you're working with a team or an individual. Is the primary goal toward power, speed, strength, agility, endurance, what? Mobility, what? Then make that your predominant focus and everything else is going to take a back seat. Because you're not going to get maximization of both. You can't get maximal endurance work and maximal speed work in the same day. It's not going to happen. To be really clear too, you can't be Usain Bolt fast and be the best endurance athlete. You can't do that. It's not going to work. Now, I'm not talking about high school level. There are people who do that. I was one of those athletes. I was just one of the best sprinters, not the best, one of the best middle distance runner, and could beat almost all the endurance athletes. Okay, because I was in that middle ground of having capabilities across all levels of performance. However, the elite of the sprinters, I couldn't keep up with them. The elite of the endurance athletes couldn't keep up with them. If you try to be too much of a jack of all trades, you've heard a million times this particular analogy, you're going to be master of none. Be really clear about what you're trying to accomplish. And I used to be one of those people that would really talk a lot about the need for strength in endurance athletes. I still am. Still think people need strength, but you better maximize your endurance first. Then you worry about building strength. If you're trying to be a football player, you worry about maximizing your strength and your power first. Then you work on the endurance to make sure you can manage that power for longer periods. Manage your ability to be able to produce high levels of effort for longer periods. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, broad thing to finish up with, a lot of stuff right here. Your duration and your intensity, try to clarify this as much as possible because this confuses a lot of people. Anything that's ultra short, that's our maximal power, maximal speed, maximal agility, maximal strength stuff, 1 to 10 seconds-ish. Short periods, 10 to 180 seconds, well, you start getting a little bit glycolytic. We're somewhere around 10 seconds, and definitely the closer you get up and up toward that 3 minutes, the more and more glycolytic you're going to be. And we're certainly talking about doing our high-intensity interval work over the short end of that short period, if you will. And certainly all that's glycolytic type work predominantly, right? Anybody whose primary sport lasts 10 seconds, 180 seconds of effort with 30 seconds or more rest between, their predominant energy system they're using is glycolysis, okay? Our moderate type work, which is really the low end of aerobic work, okay? The low end of aerobic work is 3 minutes to 20 minutes. Remember, VO2 max testing occurs in about 10 to 12 minute period. So consequently, we're talking about beyond VO2 max pace when you're talking about 3 to 10 minutes of work. So when people say VO2 max, you got to be really clear about, are you talking about effort or output? Your output better be well above your VO2 max. Okay, it's really confuses a lot of people, I know, but it's really important you understand this. I try to encourage people to not use the phrase VO2 max with glycolytic work, speed work, that kind of thing. Refer to VO2 max as it relates to aerobic work. Okay, refer to heart rate with everything. Refer to RPE with everything. Force output with everything. Okay, but VO2 max is only really your moderate work and beyond. Okay, intermediate type, endurance type work is 21 minutes to 60 minutes. Your true endurance athletes are definitely more in the intermediate level, and of course the long endurance, the 1 to 4 plus hours for the total crazies, and a few of you are those people. 4 plus hours of work is a regular activity for you. Yeah, you're engaging in long duration type activity. What makes it prolonged? Well, when it's too long compared to what you're used to. How much? 1 to 10% more than you're used to could be prolonged, right? If you're only doing 30 minutes, why would you go do an hour workout today? If you haven't done 30 minutes, more than 30 minutes in many months, that makes no sense. Why don't you go 35 minutes? Go 32 minutes. Seems silly, I know, but it's really important. You'll find a lot more progress, a lot less injury, a lot less illness, a lot more benefit, okay? And I'd love to hear your stories. Can't wait to hear them, and I'm sure that I will hear them if you'll share them with me, that you'll go, I can't believe how much more progress my athletes are getting. We're making these tiny little changes more frequently. We're not making big jumps. And it's amazing to me how much response they're getting, and they're peaking better. I'm finding my athletes that were getting beat early in the season are now beating the same people that are beating them because the other athletes are fatiguing, getting beat up, trying to push too hard, and only slightly changing the challenges for my athletes, and they're getting much better response because I'm giving more time to adapt to the stress, giving them more ability to adapt to not too much change from homeostasis, to not challenge that, gain too much of their homeostasis, so they can actually recover and come back and do it again. Awesome stuff, right? Intensity, maximal strength, power, speed, and agility is 95 to 100%, maybe as low as 90% force output, right? High intensity intervals, I don't care how hard you're trying to work. If you're going 20 seconds to somewhere up to close to a couple minutes or so, you're not going to get more than 90% of your force production somewhere in the 20-second range, and you're going to be lucky if you get 70% of your force production after about 2 minutes. You'd be lucky if you get it. You might get somewhere close to it. Elite athletes can get a little bit more than 70%, but the less elite athletes, below 70% force output in about a couple minutes time compared to what they could do in a few seconds. Okay. If you recall in one of the previous videos, I compared Usain Bolt's 100-meter dash and said if he could run a 2-mile race and keep that same pace, his actual 2-mile would be just over 5-minute 2-mile, which is ridiculous. The world record for men is under 8 minutes by 2 seconds, a couple seconds, which is still blisteringly fast. If you ever run 2 miles, you can get anywhere near 8 minutes. Well, you need to be world class. You should be competing on the world level because that's insane, okay, to get near 8 minutes in 2-mile run. Almost, it's 2 back-to-back 4-minute miles. Are you kidding me, right? But if Usain Bolt could do it, his pace, he'd be running, 5 minutes, he'd be running 2.5-minute miles, just a little bit over 2.5-minute miles. Insane. Not happening. It's about 65% of his force production for the world record 2-mile versus his actual 100-meter dash. Okay? It's actually under 65% force production. So hypertrophy work as well, maximization of hypertrophy, particularly type 2A fibers, is probably somewhere in that 70-75% force production, like we mentioned, somewhere in there. Our steady state hard runs are probably that 70-75% maximal force production type level, which is the more of the moderate type work, probably maybe a little bit toward the intermediate, but not likely, more moderate level. It could be like close to 70% if we're lucky. Okay, for the elite people. Otherwise, we're looking at lower force production for sure for those runs of moderate to intermediate length or longer, being more aerobic development, type endurance type strength type work, 65% force output or less. Some of you talked about my early stages of hypertrophy. We're doing 60-65% force production output. That's fine, but understand what you're working on is type 1 fibers. If you're okay with that, which is perfectly fine and probably completely fair to be working on motor control, better movement skill before you start to engage higher levels of challenge to challenge type 2A and type 2X fibers without having proper joint mobility, joint capability movement-wise. That makes sense, but be clear about what we're talking about. We're really talking about endurance strength or hypertrophy of type 1 fibers, right? And of course, motor skill, movement skill, coordination, form development, technique, however you want to refer to this. It's all the same general stuff. Force outputs are ridiculously low. Speed should be ridiculously low. Okay? If you go fast, you're working more towards power. Go slow. We're talking about movement skill, trying to move better. Slow it down. It's not rocket science, but a lot of people make it rocket science by trying to be too fast. If you watch your athletes, then the number one thing you can do when they're not moving well, slow them down. The one thing you can do when they're not performing well, slow them down. Lower the load and possibly reduce the range of motion. Okay? And of course, internal effort should not be confused with actual output. Okay, internal effort is intensity, no question about it. Okay, no question about it. Be really clear, but I kept it separate here to refer to actual output separately as intensity versus internal expectation or internal response to the effort made toward achieving that output. Okay, for more than just force output, subjectively we have RPE. Scale 1 to 10, you should always be thinking about how hard do I want this to be. Well, if it's all-out speed, I want their effort to be level 9, level 10 effort, generally speaking. Now, they may be faster than everybody else with level 7 effort, but if we want to maximize their speed, their effort needs to be up there in that level of expectation of how the perception of effort is, right? How's that feel? Like a 6. Now, geez, are you giving much effort here? Should be, if you're going to be faster than everybody else, that's fine. If you want to be world-class fast or faster than everybody else in the conference championships, then you better be giving more effort than your level 6 or you're going to get beat. And by the way, I've seen those athletes. I had a teammate of mine who was a stand-up 10.7 100-meter dash guy. He stood up. He didn't get in the blocks. That's blazing to go 10.7 without blocks. But because he was out of the blocks, not using the blocks, and didn't practice technique, and he kind of half-efforted it because he was so genetically blessed. When it came to conference championships, he placed 8th. He was last in the final heat. He thought he was going to somehow beat everybody. They all beat him. Okay, tough conference, by the way. He didn't run a 10.7. He ran an 11.0 or 11.1. That's why he got beat. That's why he got 8th place, because you can't be consistent if you don't work on that skill, let alone work on your maximal force production and maximal effort. Objective, heart rate is objective. What's your heart rate? Well, if you tell me your level of effort's a 4, but your heart rate's in the 60-70% of maximal effort range, well, then we're working too hard for you. We've got to lower the intensity. I don't care what you tell me you're feeling. I think you're either having a hard time understanding what RP really is, you're having a hard time relating to me what's really going on, and new athletes are like this. People who are deconditioned, you've been out of the sport for a while, you're coming off a significant illness, what your effort expectation, what you feel effort-wise, and what your output is are going to be so different, which is your indicator of you're not ready for higher intensity work. If you can't tell me what your level of effort is accurately relative to the actual output to what you're normally able to do, then you're not ready for high-level output today. Okay, it's a pretty cool little simple subjective thing you can do along with your objective measurement of your heart rate. Okay, and of course VO2 max, we're referring to more generally your pace. Your effort-wise would come from whatever you can run a 10-minute all-out effort in. That's your 100% of VO2 max. So consequently, anything you can run for shorter durations of time should probably be faster than what you can run in 10 minutes, and thus it's actually above 100% VO2 max. Your book kind of confused it a little bit too when it talks about VO2 max relative to glycolytic type work. It's talking about your heart rate response, not actually your actual pace. We're talking about speed or pace well above 100% VO2 max. Okay, and that said, hopefully that makes those concepts a little more clear, a little easier to adapt and apply. So final thoughts for you in this course: be careful about post-regression. True of any of you watching this video who are not doing discussion board posts for this in Concordia, you always got to be careful about regressing, falling off of your current path. We all do it. You can have a down day or two here and there, but don't let it affect your performance when you need it most. In the case of your post-regression, make sure you're actually reading through that post really closely, reading your other friends' posts, your other students' posts, and answering these questions I give to you to get the most out of your posts. Our second test this week, a lot of this stuff in this video is going to cover and really help you with that test. Make sure you go over the past week's videos and past sample posts and skim over the book to do well in your second exam. Call or email if you have questions. Hope you have a great week, and look forward to talking to you again soon.